Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on which part of the world you are. My name is Nickson Otieno. I'm an architect and a sustainability consultant based in Kenya. Welcome to this session in which we will be discussing the need for transformation of architecture to make it responsive to the needs and the challenges of our time. I really believe that all of us are aware that the world we are currently living in is facing many challenges, both environmental and social. We are facing a convergence of both climate, health, and economic crisis. And the solution of this is requires that we change in the way we think and the way we act. And one of the sectors in which we need radical thinking and transformation is the area of design and construction of our built environment. Yet, the reality is that in many parts of the world, architecture still continues to contribute to the social and environmental challenges we are facing rather than offering the solution. The way that our buildings are being designed and constructed and even operated and demolished has continued to increase to this depletion of resources. So we have building sector extracting more and more materials from the environment and contributing a lot of waste. And these wastes, of course, end up polluting our ecosystems and our environment. And on the other hand, especially in the developed countries where we still have many poor families, we have buildings that do not have basic services to guarantee the comfort of the residents. So for example, in Kenya, you have many families that are still living in houses that do not have electricity, that lack basic water for their needs. They don't have proper sanitation. While on the other hand, we have a lot of water being wasted, whether it is in terms of rainfall that is not harvested so that it can be properly used. And so we have a lot of people dying. In Kenya, we have 58,000 deaths occurring every year because of pollution that are largely because of the poorly designed, built, and environment that we are living in. Now, this tells us that we need to shift how our buildings are designed. And this vision of transformation could be named or called sustainable design or sustainable architecture. So what is sustainable architecture? Sustainable architecture is the kind of architecture that creates a building that solves the environmental and social challenges that we have just referred to before. These are buildings that take less from the environment while offering more to the people that use them. They are buildings that heal our heart, that heal our earth, and heal our populations. So how can we design, construct, and live in buildings that heal our earth? I invite us to consider 5 questions or 5 principles on how we design, construct, and operate our buildings. These questions are the why, the what, the where, who, and when, and how of design and construction of buildings. It is important that we begin to reevaluate the purpose of our building, design, and construction process. We need to change the thinking that only focuses on generation of profit to have a balance of the social and environmental issues in our design. We need to begin looking at our buildings as part of a larger ecosystem, as part of a larger neighborhood, rather than being only a single product, a single building for a single client who is interested in very short-term goals without considering the larger community, the larger ecosystem in which these buildings fit. And in this world of globalization, it is important for us to shift from copy-pasting ideas from different parts of the world and implementing them in the local communities without paying much attention to the physical and cultural context of those particular places. So we don't need the architecture, for example, for the Western Mediterranean climate to be implemented in Africa. I've seen, for example, where I come from, Nairobi, where in the early 1960s to 1980s, we had buildings that were designed to respond to the tropical climate of Nairobi. But because of globalization, the buildings that have been put since late 1990s coming to the current age, going more to embrace the glass architecture, buildings that are designed for different climatic contexts and sociocultural contexts, abandoning the forms and the materials that we used to apply. This truly cannot be sustainable. We also need to think of the people who are involved in the building. And by this, I mean not only the consultants and the contractors or the developers that are engaged in the building process, but we need to enlarge this scope to think about the users. We need to integrate the needs and the opinions of the would-be users of the buildings. We need to involve the communities around the places where the buildings are going to be erected to find their input. We need to expand the list of the consultants that are engaged in the design and the delivery of buildings, so that we don't only have architects and engineers involved in the conception and delivery of buildings, but we also need to bring on board social scientists. We need to bring on board ecologists to be able to set the vision of a building that is truly holistic and can perform. And we need to look at the building in a longer life cycle period. So we need to design and think of buildings that should last more than 2 generations, which is currently the kind of the design that we are having. The buildings of the old time were built to last centuries and to last millennia. Indeed, some of the magnificent built infrastructure we have, the cultural heritages that we have, for example, the Great Walls of China, those buildings that have made it to the list of UNESCO heritage. These are buildings or structures that have lasted, some of them, hundreds of years, even up to a millennium, that they were built of very basic materials with very simple technologies. How come in this age, with the developments that we have in the technology, we are only designing buildings and constructing buildings that have to be replaced so often? That really has to be changed. And we also need to think of those buildings when we are designing them, not only to look at them quick interest of design, operate the building, make profit, or leave it within your lifetime, and then your children probably may put up another building for themselves because it is no longer meeting their needs. We need to begin thinking of those buildings that can outlive us. And the designers need to be engaged not only in the conception of the building, but also to think of the life of the building whilst the users have moved in. And they should go back to check on how their buildings are performing so that they learn the lessons. And this process also needs to consider the kind of materials, the kind of methods are involved so that we clearly consider the principles of ecological, social, and economic balance in the choice of our processes, the choice of materials, and the choice of our sites. And so these really are very key questions for us to consider, the 5H and how. But now, how then can we realize this in reality, in actual practice? How can somebody who is putting up his building, maybe as a developer, maybe somebody who wants to put up his own house, or you want to put up your office block or any other commercial development, how can you really integrate this thinking, these principles or these philosophies in real practice? So allow me to share with us, some of the practical steps or practical ideas that we can really put in practice. Of course, number one is for us to have really sustainable architecture, we must begin by thinking about our natural context. We need to begin thinking about the climate in which we are designing. And this idea of bioclimatic design has been with us for many ages, but yet architects, engineers are yet to embrace this and apply it in practice. So we really need to raise more awareness and have the next generation of designers, the next generation of architects designing buildings and infrastructure that are in harmony with the climate within which those infrastructure or building projects are sitting, so that we don't design climate for tropical climate what should have been in humid climate, as I already shared earlier. We also need to think about passive design strategies. So we need to look at buildings that are using more and more of the natural available energy, the natural resources that the planet offers us. We don't necessarily need to be thinking of highly mechanized buildings where we have to use air conditioners, we have to draw more of fossil energy to be able to run our buildings. But we need to take advantage of the natural light, the natural sun, the wind, the flow of energy that we get freely from the environment. And indeed, this is what our predecessors used to do. We had people living in the most extremes of environment, in the desert, the very dry, arid areas, parts of this world. They were able to conceive buildings that were able to protect them from the harsh elements of the hot sun and the sandstorms. We had the people who were living in the very extremes of the temperate climates were able to develop buildings that could protect them from those extreme cold. But how come for today, with all the knowledge that we have, the technology that we have, we only have to rely on very active systems that are extracting more material, that are extracting a lot of energy that is based on fossil for us to keep our buildings warm when the environment is cold, and to keep our buildings cold when it is hot. We need to take advantage of passive systems for natural lighting, for ventilation, and for cooling and heating of our buildings, so that we have minimum impact on the ecological systems that we so depend on. And secondly, we need also to design our buildings to be regenerative, so that we reduce pollution, we design out waste, either by thinking of how we can easily assemble the parts of the building, designing, borrowing from the natural system, actually mimicking nature, where wastes from one part of a process become the raw material for the next part of another process, so that our buildings should be operating in cycles. So if you're looking at it in terms of, technical terms, we could probably look at natural bio-based materials that, once the building lifespan ends, they gets back to the ground, and we restore them. And I think the basic material of that kind is the earth that we've been building with over the centuries, since actually time immemorial. And still many parts of the world, in many parts of the world, the larger population of people are still living in earth houses. But we have made these people feel that these houses they're living in are really archaic and rudimentary. They need to abandon them and embrace the highly industrialized materials that have a lot of ecological footprint. So we need to embrace those natural systems. And we need also to think of how we can dismantle our buildings. How come we can easily assemble and disassemble a car, but we cannot easily assemble and disassemble a building? So that, if I design an apartment today, and after 20 years down the line, maybe the realities of that time are such that apartments are not the best type of building for that particular geographical setup. I should be having the flexibility to adjust the spaces within my building, to model it out in a very easy way with low environmental footprint, to make it fit for the purpose that time. These are some of the principles that we need to consider in the new kind of architecture that we call sustainable architecture, which is responsive to the realities of our time. The other area that we also need to pay attention to is the materials that we use in our construction. I want to dwell much more on this. Currently, we are building buildings with highly specialized, highly engineered materials, in many cases drawn over very long distance. There's more and more effort to abandon, materials that have low footprint. in terms of the ecological footprint, the greenhouse gas emissions, and even the social contributions to the regeneration of the local economy in terms of creating jobs and creating opportunities, especially for those who don't have the jobs. So for us to be able to have a sustainable architecture, we also need to have sustainable materials being applied in the construction of the buildings that we put up. And these materials are those materials that are locally sourced so that we don't depend on long distances where we are extracting materials, raw materials from far land and ship them to another far distant part of the country, in most cases, probably sometimes in China. And then we ship the refined and processed material back, for example, to Africa or to whichever part of the world to put up our building, while we could have actually sourced those materials and remodeled them and used them within that site. When we are sourcing those materials from long distances, we have those much footprint in terms of transport. Of course, we have also the jobs that are lost. And of course, often the companies that are extracting these materials in the original place, they also contributing to the degradation of that environment because they are not necessarily concerned about preserving it, since they will not live there to see the impacts of their irresponsible extraction. So we need to promote use of locally sourced materials as much as it's practically possible. Secondly, the materials need to be more renewable rather than being non-renewable. We need to encourage the use of materials that can easily, be taken back into reuse to promote the circular thinking, as I've already discussed earlier. We also need to use materials that have higher recycled content, materials that are reused and repurposed. So for example, if we can be able to, rather than demolish buildings, we just dismantle them carefully and recover the materials that were used in another old project in a new construction project, we would be able to prevent the need for further extraction of virgin materials, which actually disturbs the ecological setups where those materials are sourced from. We need to move more to a scenario of reuse within the construction, the building and the construction sector. And we also need to design buildings that are more durable, and recall the scenario I've given where we have structures that have lasted over 1,000 years, yet our current buildings cannot last, some of them cannot even last 150 years. So we need to design not only the entire building to last long, but also we need to have the building components that are designed to be more durable. We need not to be, why do we have to be designing, for example, the lighting fixtures, which have to be replaced every other 5 years as we go keep on extracting materials? Of course, the reason might be to sustain some people's profit. Then we need to challenge the industry to think of how they can have sustainable income, sustainable revenues without creating materials that have to be replaced every other new day. So we need to probably think of different business models around the material supply industry. Also, we need to have more and more examples of truly sustainable architecture outside there. And to this end, I would like to share with us in the next part of this presentation how myself as Nickson and the team with which I'm working are trying to put these principles in practice in our current context, in my local context within Kenya. So allow me to lead you through the practice that we are developing that would embody the spirit of sustainable design, rethinking architecture to be responsive. We have a vision to create a practice that responds to 3 issues of circularity, promoting natural materials which are also renewable and fitting very well within their local context, and also use of technologies and promoting projects that contributes to social community regeneration, social inclusion, building more and more, socially inclusive societies. So we're not looking at only architecture that is for the few, but we are looking at architecture that benefits the majority of the society. To be able to understand this issue of social exclusion, for example, I would like to present to us a case of the school infrastructure. We have a clear understanding that access to education is a basic right that is enshrined in every constitution. It is a universal basic human right. Yet, in many parts of the developing countries and in many parts of Africa, Kenya included, the basic infrastructure for learning is so poor. So take a case of Kenya where we don't have adequate classrooms. We don't have sanitation facilities in school. We don't have libraries. Government is making very bold commitments towards universal access. But as long as we still have such infrastructure gaps, it would be very difficult for us to achieve that reality of universal basic education access. Allow me to give you a picture of what that really is in our context. I'm going to share with you a video.
The shame of the sorry state of public schools in various parts of the country is disturbing. Mangororo Primary School in Ganze, Kilifi County is one such school where pupils are learning under poor conditions. Images of children sitting on stones in a flooded classroom has angered the country, begging the question, why are children still learning in deplorable conditions? Doka Swangira reports. At Mangororo Primary School in Jaribuni Ward, Ganze, Kilifi County, a picture of luck paints itself in these dilapidated classrooms. This image of young pupils standing and sitting on concrete building blocks, with one pupil gazing, steeped in thought, as the mud-floored classroom flooded yesterday sparked anger. The head teacher, Gertrude Nyambu, tells us that of the 5 classrooms, 2 are structurally sound, 3 are not. Children learn under the shade of trees. One class is being shared by class 6 and class 7 pupils.
This is not a picture of an abandoned house or classroom, much as it may look like it. These are the dilapidated Mawani Primary School classes in Kilome sub-county of Makueni, where knowledge is disseminated. Makueni is characteristically hot, but the space between the barely mud-thatched walls and the creaky roofing is not at all for air conditioning. If anything, the wind blowing through can present health problems. On the other extreme, being a rainy season, the teachers and pupils are drenched in worry because when it rains here, it pours.
These run-down toilets at the Kiambogo Primary School paint an apt picture of the school's crumbling shame. It's a delicate balancing act, a risky venture anytime one heeds to the call of nature. Now they have to share the 3 latrines takes up much of their class time. The situation in the classrooms is no different. These threadbare walls are barely enough to keep the cold at bay.
While these toilet structures are falling apart, the pupils here are taking the suffering for it, at risk of contracting diseases and with nowhere to relieve themselves. These pit latrines have now lost their purpose and are a pitfall, a ticking time bomb.
And this is Lord Watum Primary School, one of over 200 public primary schools in the vast county.
That is just a brief of what has been covered in our media, and the scenario really is bad for many schools. And the reason, of course, partly is issues to deal with budgetary allocations, but it's also because of the current of the architectural practice that makes it so difficult for the communities and the government to be able to develop these facilities at a rate that can respond to the need that these communities have. So what are we doing about this? Of course, we have 2 approaches. This first approach is where we want to start, of course, shifting the current trend in the design, the modern architectural design using, high-tech industrialized materials, to begin bridging this with natural elements, to bring in the softer part of design, more integrative, more kind of regenerative architecture to begin to bear in the high-end building and construction project. And so here I just share with us an example of such project that we are currently working on. We are developing actually a design, finalizing the design of a building for one of the universities in Kenya. And this is going to be an air pollution actually hub. So here you can see we are beginning to embrace those principles of, in case, instead of cutting all down all the trees to put up the building, the way we have sited this building on the site is such that we are only displacing 5 trees. And of those 5 trees, 2 of them we are relocating, so we are transplanting them. And the only 3 that we are not able to transplant, we will cut. But we are replacing those trees that we've cut by planting other new trees within the neighboring site. But also on the site, we are providing more biodiversity. So we want to enhance the biodiversity on that site by providing green walls and green roofs that we would be able to improve onto the intensity of the biodiversity within that site. We are using a lot of large passive design strategy, taking advantage of natural ventilation and natural lighting such that this building will be able to operate from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. every day without having to switch on lights in most of the rooms. And also, of course, we are harnessing the readily available energy within the context, solar energy. We're going to reclaim waste, the organic waste from the kitchen and the toilets. We are going to get this into digestive systems so that we are able to provide the heating energy requirements for this building. We're doing a lot of other, of course, intervention in terms of the choice of the materials, that the walls are going to be built of natural stones and rammed earth without really depending on any processed concrete panels. And when you come to the interior of the spaces, we are providing, living walls so that people can have better working space and natural purification of the air. So those are kind of some of the interventions that we're just trying to demonstrate in this building so that this space, this building can be a living lab of how we can be able to design and construct the future high-tech, high-performing buildings that are not only talking about energy efficiency, which is cosmetic, but also talk about buildings that are regenerative, adding eventually natural value. So to the context that they were developed in. And then secondly, we are looking at now the social projects that will provide a lot more of labor and promote more natural, locally available materials, use of earth to build. So here is one project which we are doing, which involves the construction with stabilized earth blocks. So these are blocks that we just get soil, different ratios of soil, and we put it in machine and compact them. So to replace the use of fired bricks and concrete in construction of walls. Here we are having, use of simple earth, reviving what used to be in the village, but we integrating a little bit of design so that these people don't feel like their buildings that was thatched roofed and which was mud wall is too archaic. We want to look at how we can integrate this traditionally tested methods of construction with modern, modern techniques with design to make them very functional and very aesthetically appealing infrastructure for different setups, both for private clients, but also for public spaces, especially the communities that are not able to mobilize a lot of resources to build expensive buildings for what they need, whether it is infrastructure for school or whether it is the healthcare facilities. And of course, COVID-19 has actually shown us the importance of investing in more healthcare infrastructure. But the reality for Africa and Kenya included is that we still have many hospital facilities that are largely lacking in terms of the basic infrastructure. So we really hope that use of such natural systems, natural materials that are readily available, employing the redundant labor. Africa has a huge problem of labor. We don't need to import many of the materials, prefabricated walls from China, from different other parts of the world, and exclude the people who could have worked actually on construction of this wall with readily available material. So those are some of the things that we are looking at. And besides that, we are also activating reuse within the construction sector. So we have realized that this is an industry that also produces a lot of waste in terms of materials, with almost 15% of the materials that are taken to every site ending up being dumped as waste. So to really deal with that waste of materials, we have created a platform, a digital platform, where people can share the waste materials that are generated from their sites, and people can either, of course, post, and others can buy those materials, or they can donate these materials to community regeneration projects. And I invite you to visit our website. It is endelevu.co.ke. You'll be able to see already the pilot community regeneration projects that we are doing, rebuilding schools, classrooms, improving on walls for healthcare facilities using materials that have been reclaimed from construction sites and existing buildings. And of course, an example of this, particularly what we are doing, we are targeting, at the moment, we have already launched a pilot project that we want to roll out across the country, reclaiming cement bags from our construction sites and using these cement bags to construct earth walls. So just to give you a picture of the scenario, Kenya produces almost over 84 million bags of cement every year. From our research, we realized that if we were to reclaim all these cement bags and refill them with debris from the construction site, we would be able to construct perimeter walls for 2,000 schools every year. And if you can recall the statistics that I gave earlier at the presentation, that more than 41% of schools do not have any fences. So we really believe that just by a simple action like reclaiming these used cement bags and the debris that generated from the construction site, we would be able to fence those 41% of schools within the next 5 years. We are also demonstrating, working on pilot projects that involve design for deconstruction or for ease of disassembly. So here is a girls' school in some part of Kenya, a boarding girls' school that does not have a library, does not have a dining space, but the school accommodates 1,200 girls every day. So we decided to implement a very simple pilot project that is improving the in-between spaces. Of course, the school also has a limitation of space in terms of land, because the land size is pretty small. So we are mobilizing materials from the waste, from the construction site, for example, off-cut timber, pellets, those wooden blocks, paving blocks, that then we creatively apply in design so that we are able to create better reading spaces. We are using, for example, this roofing of this space, we are taking membranes, plastic materials from events, large events, the canvases that have been used in events, and then we are repurposing these ones to form the roofing materials for construction of these multi-purpose reading and dining spaces for these girls, so as to also showcase the importance of circularity in the construction. Now, for many, many more of those projects, I invite you once again to go and visit our Endelevu website. You'll be able to find more and more of such projects that we are doing to be able to showcase the practice of sustainable architecture in our context. not necessarily in other contexts. And I believe such principles could be borrowed and could be customized and applied in other contexts without necessarily just copy pasting blindly, as I had already warned against earlier on. So in summary, we have shared how we can be able to really transform our architecture to be sustainable, to respond to the environmental and social challenges of our time. From, of course, thinking of integration of natural materials in our construction process, use of passive design strategies for operating our buildings so that we rely on natural energy. We use more solar energy as much as possible. We also need to install, of course, efficient system where we have to rely on the highly engineered systems. We need also to integrate nature into the building so as to enhance biodiversity. We need also to design our buildings to be more resilient. We need to design our buildings to take advantage of the resources that are available in terms of water from the site. We need to be able to reuse the materials. We need to be able to, of course, also get back the waste from our site. So if it is stormwater, we need to harness it and reuse it, probably in irrigating the plants that we have planted on site. Or if it's the wastewater from our toilets, then we need to harness this and be able to produce energy, probably through use of biogas or through use of other engineered sanitation systems. And I really want to, at this point, to invite us to be part and parcel of challenging the transformation of architecture to be more responsive to the issues of our time. Of course, how can we do that? We can begin by applying those questions, those principles that we've learned. Ask yourself, why, how, when, what, and the people, place, project, all those principles that we have just shared in your project, in your small scale, be part and parcel of the solution in, of course, by integrating in your own project, whether you are in your workplace or your residential house. And also, you could also join hands with those who are doing, community regeneration projects. You could visit our end-level platform and see what we are doing. And if you're really interested in learning more and supporting, we are more than willing to engage with you. For any queries, you are invited to contact us, and we would be glad to share more. Thank you very much for listening to me, and I look forward to us working together to build a future that is truly sustainable, buildings that conserve our resources, buildings that enhance social inclusion rather than perpetuating social exclusion, material depletion, and waste proliferation. May God bless you. Thank you.